It's good to see you all today. I want to start by first acknowledging the tragedy of what happened in Texas yesterday and how grateful I am to have this chance to spend this next bit of time with you in talking through how we engage students in this work, and also with the heavy heart of knowing that we can't even begin to have this conversation without providing all students everywhere with a safe space. So both a privilege and an honor to be able to have this conversation with each of you today. And that's not lost on me. But it is my pleasure to pass the baton over to our policy fellow, Giselle, who will be leading today's panel. And so I'm grateful to the panelists for taking the time to have this conversation with us. We are in the process of revising our social studies standards in DC, which President Sutter has been leading for years at this point. And what that opened up for us as a question is how we not only engage students in the revision of these social studies standards this year, but also how we engage students in the revision of all of our standards long-term. And that is the broadest level question that we have been asking, and why we're really grateful to have this chance to talk with you today. So with that, I'll pass to Giselle.
Thank you, Representative Chang. I don't know if you all can hear this, but the fire alarm, I think, in the building next door is going off. So hopefully it goes off soon and it, doesn't continue throughout the panel, but I thought that timing was kind of funny. But anyway, again, echoing Representative Chang, thank you so much to all the panelists that were able to join us today. I really appreciate you taking the time out of your busy schedules to join us and speak to your experiences serving with your respective state boards or working closely with your state's board, your state board of education. So thank you very much. I wanted to center the purpose around this panel and just lay it out and explain it. So here at the DC State Board, we're hoping to gain insight and learnings from our different panelists today so that we can further include authentic student voice and engagement in the district's standards revision process. The DC does not currently have a codified process by which we review state academic standards, and we hope to establish and propose one by the end of the year. One that includes, again, student voice and engagement. And then a few reminders. I wanted to frame the discussion by explaining the distinction that here in the district we have between standards and curriculum. The state board is focused on standards and not curriculum because we don't have the oversight and authority here in the district over curriculum. So when we're talking about standards, we're talking about what students should know and be able to do, versus curriculum is thought of as how those standards are taught. And so the state board, as Representative Chang just mentioned, is engaged in the revision of the DC social studies standards and has been for the past 2 years. And students have actually been involved in that process too through an advisory committee. And before I turn it over to the panelists so that they can introduce themselves, I did want to say that forming this panel was a bit of a challenge because as I was doing my research, I noticed that not a lot of states are currently engaged in this type of work where we're involving students in the policy process. So DC is already at the forefront of this work, and I'm excited to continue to push this work further along with the help of you all. So thank you. And I'm now going to turn it over to the panelists. So I'm going to put this in the chat, but if you could say your name, your current role and title, and for students, if you could say your grade and the school that you attend, and then Also, the state you represent and the length of your term if you are a student representative, as well as maybe highlighting a project in which you elevated student voice in your state, or related to supporting the updates to your state standards or curriculum. So again, that was a lot. So I'm going to go ahead and put that in the chat. Let's see if I can. And if I can't, if somebody can help me with that, that'd be great. Let's see. All right, there we go. So I will turn it to whoever wants to go first.
Hi everyone, pleased to be here. My name is Eleni Livingston. I'm the student board member on the Massachusetts Board of Education, and I'm a senior at Wellesley High School. I'm also the chair of the Massachusetts State Student Advisory Council. So I think my involvement with updating standards in Massachusetts is twofold. One is having conversations at the board level regarding the competency determination standards, which are related to MCAS scores, our standardized testing scores. So right now we're talking about raising the standard, the passing standard essentially for MCAS, in order to ensure that students who are graduating high school have effectively demonstrated the standards that are expected of them throughout high school. And then through this, the Student Advisory Council, I've helped to guide some efforts around curriculum reform as well, mental health and diversity, equity, and inclusion. Those were our three subgroups this year, and there was a lot of great work revolving around those topics.
Thank you, Eleni. Paquita, would you like to go next?
Yes, and good morning. I'm Paquita Jarman-Smith. I really feel honored to be here with you all today. I work at the State Education Resource Center, and our office is in Middletown, Connecticut. And we work with all school districts, and we are an arm of the Connecticut State Board of Education, as well as the Connecticut Department of Education. And I've been with CERC for 19 plus years. And primarily, my discipline is in early childhood education and leadership. And relevant to this discussion today is my role as one of the coordinators of the first Connecticut statewide African American, Black, and Puerto Rican Latino course of studies. And I work with our syllabus committees who help to put together our course objectives for the curriculum. It's different from the standards, and the content group, social studies content group. And we started our work right before the pandemic. I had one in-person meeting with our social studies content committee, and then we went virtual. I've also worked with youth in my role at CERC, but particular to this course of studies, we did not start with standards, getting their input on standards. We've got their input on what the curriculum would look like. And we had a few in-person focus groups with students. We divided our state into regions, and we held focus groups with students, families, and community members. We had in our student focus groups about 31 respondents out of 96, and they expressed interest in some of these topics that I'm going to share with you from their standpoint. They wanted a deeper study of inequalities and understandings of racism as a social construct, a better understanding of varied backgrounds and cultures of intra-racial communities. They want teaching of real history that goes beyond stereotypes. They wanted to find out about the local, statewide context for history for the two groups that we are studying, and an emphasis on strengths rather than the weakness of those groups, African American, Puerto Rican, and Latino, just to build their own self-identity. They also wanted to learn about some pop culture and things that youth are really, really interested in. Here in Connecticut, our students participated in legislative hearings in support of the course. They've been interviewed through the media. You know, if you go on our website, you'll see student voice there. They also, in the focus group, we had opportunities to speak with them and their teachers. Teachers are currently now working with the students who are engaged in this course. They're planning a big showcase. So we hope to hear more from students about how the course is going and what things and suggestions that they really resonated with, and the things and curriculum that they think should be changed. So thank you for this opportunity.
Of course. Thank you, Paquita. I'll go ahead and turn it over to our final panelist, Sulianna. I hope I'm pronouncing your name correctly.
Yes, you are. Thank you. My name is Sulianna Mesfin. I am a high school senior in Louisville, Kentucky, Eastern High School to be exact. And I'm the first student to serve on the Kentucky State Board of Education. And I was appointed as a non-voting member to serve a 2-year term back in 2020. And I've also served as a student consultant to the Kentucky Department of Education ever since my freshman year, representing Jefferson County. So yeah, that's me. And one project that we've been doing here in Kentucky, I say this because it's Mental Health Awareness Month. We partnered with our state's lieutenant governor, myself and a group of students and we established several mental health roundtables all across the state. And this was really an opportunity to, introduce conversation and dialogue in certain areas of the state that weren't having those mental health conversations, but also centering students. So everything was facilitated by students, conducted by students, and ultimately was for students. And it really, that voice was a motivator and drive in the work and our results. So after having those roundtables in each of our state's congressional district, we were able to meet with hundreds of students across the state and really just hearing the needs of students and what they feel they needed within their district and county. And we were able to turn everything that we heard into policy recommendations. And so we did some research and we compiled, I don't like to say data, but we compiled all the responses and we made sure to hit on 10 subject areas that we thought needed to be introduced to the legislature. So currently we're working on developing those policy recommendations, and a lot of them tied back to curriculum and standards in terms of how do we incorporate social and emotional learning within our everyday learning practices. And so that is something we're also working with, and also alongside legislators, as we're hoping to gain bipartisan support for when we do introduce these policy recommendations further. And so this has been a student wide effort, and due to that we have this has led to the governor's administration prioritizing this, and also individual congressional districts and regions of the state as well, and we're able to support them throughout the process and hopefully getting some bills passed. So that's something that we've been doing here in Kentucky. And yeah, I think that's pretty much it.
Thank you, everyone, for introducing yourselves and giving some background on what you're working on. Yes, Mr. O'Leary, I see your hand is up. Oh, I think you're muted.
When I put the raise hand or hand, and it had different kinds of things, didn't have the same kind of thing on the screen there. I have a couple of questions. First question is for everyone. How much receptivity do you get from the governor's office for what you're doing in your state? That's for everybody.
I can answer this question. We got a lot of support from the governor's office. The governor was the one who established the student board seat and as well as the teacher board seat that we have. And I also serve alongside our state's lieutenant governor on the board, and she serves as a ex officio member in a non-voting position as well. And so we work very closely together. And even in terms of, when we had some pushback from legislators in terms of establishing the seat, the governor's administration, willingly supported that the seat be something that remains for years to come. And so they've always supported student-led work, which is something that is very essential when you're having well, in my case, I was the first student. So, bringing students in to the board and, just making sure that they are on decision-making committees.
Great. Anybody else?
I can go. I would say,
Can you speak up a little bit? It's
Yes.
hard to hear you.
Is everyone having difficulty hearing me? I can, it could be a mic thing.
It sounds a little quiet, but
Let me see. Is that any better?
keep speaking. Sorry.
Is this any better?
That's better. Yeah.
Okay. Could have just been the positioning of the computer. So the Massachusetts Board of Education has a very tight relationship with the governor's office. And I would say there's a lot of collaboration, particularly between the Secretary of Education and the Commissioner and the Governor. So I would say there's not really any pushback from the governor's office at all. I would say both the governor's office and the board works in conjunction to help with these initiatives that we're working on.
Thank you.
And I can share from Connecticut that our governor is really, really supportive of the work that we're doing with the curriculum, and has even held meetings with youth to hear their input. They also are working with our state Board of Education, and it's just really wonderful to see that this course means so much to the state of Connecticut. We also had the honor of having Secretary of Education Cardona in Connecticut, and now he's on the national level, and he's still promoting that our students have these curriculums that are more inclusive and equitable for young people. So we're still in that positive zone.
That's
and
great.
lots of support.
Can I turn a question around? Do I have time to do? I don't know if we're on a clock or anything. We're an independent agency. We're not under the government per se. That sounds really good, except for the fact that we don't have any. We don't have that much say in how anything, like the standards that Representative Sutter has been shepherding for the last 2 years are really, really great, but we're not the ones that decide on the standards themselves. The mayor eventually has to has to vote on that for herself. And when you were talking about the what you call real history, I'm using your words. what social studies standards should be about. Real history, not the history that's in history books. In DC, we don't even get pushback at our school board meetings from the community about anything that's going on as far as curriculum and stuff like that. And I retired a little bit ago after a long time as an English teacher, and I think I only had one parent in 47 years that ever complained about a book that I was teaching. But we're an anomaly nationwide compared to that. So it sounds like Connecticut is really, and when we talk about Kentucky, the political figure in Kentucky that jumps onto everybody's screen doesn't seem like that much of an advocate for real history. Is that right?
Can I just follow up?
Sure.
I want to let you know that we definitely have our own state and national standards, social studies standards, and Connecticut is in the process of revising those standards. And because we're a state of many different districts also can write curriculum. The unique, but they have to use state standards. And this is a model curriculum that it's pretty much mandated that they give students access to it. It's an elective, so students can choose whether they want to or not, but this is one of the, is going to be one of the ongoing model statewide curriculums that we have.
Great.
So I just wanted to share that with you.
Thank you. What about in Kentucky?
Yeah, I mean, you're right. We do have representation that isn't necessarily for, updated, historically accurate curriculum, and that's definitely represented within our legislators. And so really at the Department of Education front, we do all our best to oppose anything that does not represent, our students and does not represent or anything that tries to limit conversations within the classroom. But you do have those people, and it's unfortunate. And we've seen over the past years, especially within these big debates that have been happening recently, where students have rallied and have testified the progression of the bills and the sponsors and all of that stuff. And so we really try to do everything to hopefully not progress the itinerary of particular sponsors.
You've only been, how long have you been on the state board? Because you sound like you've got the way to speak politically really down pat.
Oh, I've had many interactions with them, unfortunately, but yeah, since 2020.
And thank you for your question, Representative O'Leary. We're gonna open it up to board member questions in a moment, but I did want to open it up with one question here. And that is, this is for all the panelists. If there was an issue or concern in a current set of state academic standards, what would you do to try to fix or change it? And I can put that question in the chat as well.
Eleni, what if, do you feel comfortable starting?
Sure. So I would say if I recognize that there was an issue with the standards, I would first bring it to the commissioner, and I would suggest that we have a discussion at the board regarding that particular standard. But I think alongside that, it's essential to have conversations with stakeholders, and that includes parents, teachers, students, administrators, because I think sometimes there can be repercussions to different policy changes that we might not expect when we initially start talking about a change to the standards. And I think it's really important to include all stakeholders in the discussion to ensure that we're aware of all possible positive or negative effects that a standard change could bring about. And I think that a panel forum works really well for that. But I think also just sitting down and having conversations just day to day with people, if that meant, reaching out to students at my school to ask if they wanted to speak to me, or teachers from another school that I have pre-existing relationships with. I think that those are some really effective ways to get feedback on potential standard changes that remain genuine, and just to keep the conversation open.
Thank you. Anybody else?
I can jump in. My organization is in a unique position to work collaboratively with the State Board of Education, who oversees all of the standards and development. And it's just a matter of our relationship with them they ask of our feedback within these history standards that we're using now, and looking forward to the new standards that are going to be developed. We have, as their outreach, we have a website where we have a link where stakeholders from anywhere in the state, they get current updates. So as things change, they could shoot us an email through that feedback link. We also have relationships with the legislative committee, like the educational committee, who oversees standards as well. And so sometimes they reach out to us for feedback and input. So those are the ways. And with all of those being said, if there's any need for student voice, they always reach out to us to see what students they can invite to speak and engage in the conversations.
That's really interesting, especially the fact that you serve as that body that connects students with the state board. So thank you for sharing that. Solyana, do you have anything you'd like to add to this specific question?
Yeah, I mean, my process about going about this is pretty similar to everyone. I think the concept of relationships is something so important. And so, firstly, I hold, within the Department of Education, I think everything is kind of interconnected. So, I would go to the director of policy, or the Department of Standards and academic revision and things like that. And even if this was something that was introduced to the legislature, like who I would interact with the sponsors as well. And so, seeing ways into kind of like, what, like Eleni said, just kind of being like, what if this were to pass, or if this were to be implemented, what would this mean for students, and how this would impact certain students as well. And so you're looking at it from an equity related standpoint. And so I think just the incorporation of all stakeholders, like that has been said, this is something that affects students, but also something that, affects teachers and family members and things like that. And so we hold a lot of pride in our different advisory committees at the Department of Education. And we have, I'd say about 30 from all, different stakeholder groups. And so introducing, an academic standard to them and getting their feedback and truly using it as a propeller and how we approach it further.
Awesome. Yes, Eleni, go ahead.
I also just wanted to add to that. I think that when we're having those conversations with different stakeholders, I think it's important to address ways to remediate concerns that they bring up as well. So for instance, right now, as I said, in Massachusetts, we're talking about revising the competency determination standards. So that would be raising the MCAS score needed to basically pass high school and get your competency determination. But obviously, if you raise the score, there's going to be more kids who are falling under the cutoff score. So how are we going to ensure that we're bridging the gap between the standards that those students are able to demonstrate? How are we making sure that those students are able to learn those standards? And one way we've been discussing doing that is through educational proficiency plans. So as we're talking about raising the competency determination standard, we're simultaneously having the conversation about really deepening and broadening the impact of educational proficiency plans so that they become much more holistic, much more specific to the student, in order to ensure that when we're talking about raising standards, we're also not leaving students worse off. And I think that's something that's really important as well.
Thank you for that important added note there. Before I moved on, I did want to circle back to you, Paquita, because you mentioned that web link that your organization utilizes as a tool. And I was wondering if you could maybe share that or speak more to that.
Yes, I'm going to get the link right now, but it's a public act, and just give me a minute to bring it up. My computer is not happy today. But I can tell you, I'm not able to go right now to get it, but in the Public Act 19-12, we have a website and a webpage just for the Black and Puerto Rican curriculum. And there's a feedback link for people to share any updates or questions that they might have. And then we turnkey that within our State Department colleagues. There's also information, ongoing information about all of the professional development, all of the revisions to the curriculum, and any advisory meetings that are forthcoming. So as soon as I can get that up, I'll put it in the link. Did that answer your question?
Yes, thank you. And don't worry about, if your computer's giving you a hard time, you could always email that to me and then I'll share it out with board members as well. But before I open the question and answer portion of our panel up to all the board members, I did want to raise one question that our student advisory committee posed. I joined their meeting on Monday and they formulated a really interesting question that I wanted to raise to you all. And that is, how is your state agency and or board ensuring the equity and diversity of student voice and engagement in its given process? And how does or doesn't your state engage with students like yourself in general policy discussions? So like the other question, I'll also go ahead and share this and give you all a moment to reflect on that question.
I can share.
Sure.
With the State Department of Education, we not only are working with students in the Black and Latino course, but we have student advisory councils that we work with throughout the year. And that group includes neurodiverse, all types of diverse students working together and working on their leadership skills. We also have a prevention youth group that we've been working on this summer to help with substance misuse prevention. And if there is a need, well, whenever we're asked to help them to identify youth and students, we always are asking teachers to share the information and give the opportunity to a diverse perspective of students. because we really, within our agency, we have a mission for equity and excellence in education. So it's just the way we operate to ensure that all students have an opportunity to participate and engage in being a leader.
That's awesome. And again, really, really important work. So happy that Connecticut is also at the forefront of really connecting students with this policy work. So thank you for sharing. Solyana or Eleni, would you like to share?
Yeah, that is really amazing work. I'm so glad to hear that, because that's definitely something that we've been trying to do here in Kentucky. I've served about 3 commissioners of education over the past couple of years, and that's a lot for a couple of years. But just recently, you know, we solidified a commissioner, and we're revisiting how we introduce student voice and to the state, right? So we're really, for some areas of Kentucky, it's something that has been ongoing, but in others, you know, the concept of it wasn't something that's translated, especially from the departmental standpoint. And so, you know, me entering this movement and you know, kind of seeing the point in which Kentucky's at, it was very much dominated by, you know, the students that you would expect, right? You know, it's the students that have been uplifted by their school systems for years, the students who have been high achieving academically, the student athletes, all the students who have been praised were those who have been leading the student voice movement. And we're really looking to, you know, redefine what is student voice and what is student leadership, and how to identify that within a school building, and how do we in turn uplift students to, you know, prioritize, you know, education and education policy, and want to enter this field in terms of advocacy, right? And so that's really what we've been doing. It's really being intentional with the certain groups that you uplift, and making sure that whoever is representing students is an accurate representation in terms of, you know, diversity, in terms of, you know, socioeconomic status and all, you know, everything related to that. And so we're working on, I'd say, a framework, or we're just working on a set of standards, I guess, to which describes what is student voice, what is accurate student voice, what it truly is, what truly resembles our state and individual counties as well, and how do we make sure that teachers and administrators and every other stakeholder uplifts students who haven't been uplifted in the past. And so, yeah, it's really amazing work, and I'm glad that, you know, we have states like Connecticut and hopefully DC as well to look for that guidance in hopes of, you know, starting to bring forth this movement.
That framework that you mentioned is really interesting. So I'd love to connect with you maybe and get a little bit more information about the work that Kentucky is doing to reframe, I guess. Eleni, did you want to add anything?
Sure, and thank you to the other 2 panelists for those very thoughtful answers. I think to answer this question, I want to give a little bit of context as to the structure of the Student Advisory Council that I referenced earlier. So the way this works, it's written into Massachusetts law that the department needs to have this advisory body composed of students, which I think is amazing in and of itself. But so we have 5 regional councils, which represent 5 different regions across Massachusetts. And students are elected directly from their schools to serve at their regional advisory councils. From those regional councils, delegates are elected to be on the state council, which has delegation from across the whole state. And then from there, I was elected to be the chair of the council, which is also how I got the seat on the board. So I think through that, we get at least diversity in geographic location, But one thing we've been reflecting upon this year is the diversity of our council is often very lacking because, as I think Sulianna put, oftentimes the students who are in these positions are like the same type of kid over and over again. It's like the kids who are good students, the kids who have been uplifted. So we're trying to think about how we can make our council and the structure of our council feel more open and inviting to all types of students, and how we can. Another thing is making sure that it's an accessible council for all schools. So we reach out to different schools and ask for them to please send delegates to the regional councils. But alongside that, we have to think about our meeting locations. Is it easy for kids to get there? So those are just some of the things we're thinking about. As far as the competency determination standards go, they had a competency determination advisory council, and on that council they had a student member who's also a member of the student advisory council. And then for my position, through the student advisory council, there's an executive committee which I can go to if I want some advice on how to vote on different policy that's being presented to the board. So that, I think that's around, we have around 11 kids on the executive committee. So if there's something that has broader implications to the student, the student community in Massachusetts, I can go to that committee and ask them for their opinions, both based on their experiences at their own schools and also regionally what they're hearing through the regional advisory councils. And I think also the fact that I have a vote is really important, and I urge all state boards to include the student member in their voting body. So I'm a full voting member. And I think that's really important because it allows me to not only advocate to the students through my words, but also in a way that is in a way that could actually help to like shift whether or not policy is enacted. And I think that's really important as well.
Yeah, I really appreciate that context that you provided, Eleni. And just to share some context from here in the district, we have 4 student representatives. We used to have 2, and just recently a former student representative advocated for the addition of 2 additional seats, and at least 1 student out of the 4 representatives should be a student from either Ward 7 or 8. The district is separated into 8 wards, and Ward 7 and 8 largely sees minimal representation. And I know that's something that you mentioned and we've been talking about. So we have one of our fellow student representatives actually on this call right now. Liv is here, and so she's kindly joining us from her car because she has just transitioned out of her school day. So thank you again, Liv, for joining in. And again, thank you, Eleni, for sharing that. And so all our student reps also are voting members, and I totally agree with you. I think every student representative should have that important vote to influence policy within their boards. But yes, now I will open it up to our board members. And so I see hands. So I will go with Representative Chang for the first question.
Thank you, Giselle. So one thing that has been top of mind for me is, I think theoretically, right, we all agree that student engagement in the abstract makes sense and we need more of it. Designing it, facilitating it, managing it, following through with it, all that tactical stuff to actually do it isn't always done well, as you know, even if the institutions have a really good intention of trying. So I'd love to learn from you. In your experiences, what have some of the mistakes been that you've seen when students have been engaged? And what can we learn from those mistakes as we build deeper student engagement here in DC?
Can I say something? Because sitting here with these wonderful student leaders from Massachusetts and Kentucky, I'm just so impressed. I think the mistake that we sometimes underestimate the drive, the determination of our young people. And we want to do everything and we want to make everything, the way we see it. So I feel like we need to give our students the space to lead and to listen to them and follow up and, have a back and forth discussion, because they certainly have some insights that we don't have. So I'm really proud to be here, and you all are fantastic and phenomenal.
Eleni, what's your take on this?
Sure. And thank you so much for those comments. That's really sweet. And I'm very glad to be here as well, with all of these wonderful leaders. So I think one thing that I've observed is oftentimes when there's a particular body, either through the department or different constituents in the community, they'll reach out to either me or my advisor on the Student Advisory Council and ask for a couple of students to come and share their thoughts. But I think that when we have this structure of a Student Advisory Council, which can have, like the state council, I think can have around 60 delegates. My feeling is it's great if people just come to our meetings and speak to the whole council, because there might be students who, for a variety of reasons, aren't able to give more time than they already aren't able to, go to a separate meeting to meet with different constituents. But if those people can come to our meetings, we can have a very diverse set of voices give their input on whatever topic we're discussing.
If I may just clarify there, Eleni, you're saying create a centralized process rather than having the processes of gathering student voice be more ad hoc?
Yes, because I think that when you come directly to students, it's different than having students be sent out to talk to different constituents. So, like I said, sometimes I'll be asked to suggest or go myself to go speak to different constituents, which I'm always happy to do. But because we have a more centralized, as you said, centralized advisory council of students from across the state, to me, it makes a lot more sense if those people who are looking for student input come to our meetings, because then they can hear from a more diverse range of voices than if we just send 3 or 4 kids to go talk to those people.
Thank you. And Solyana, I'd love your take on this too.
Yeah, given that, we're just having momentum in this movement, there has been a lot of mistakes happen. But I'd say one is people like to leverage students as part of their argument, but they don't like to include us in, anything after that, so you'd have people that would say, oh, we have student perspective on this, but in reality, they only talk to us for like a minute, and they're using us as part of their message to leverage it, but we're not in and we're not represented within that message. And I think student voice is truly about co-creation, and you need to think about ways of how to incorporate students and integrate them into your work and have them as partners rather than just, somebody that's a volunteer or lesser than, just having somebody who you can work with in whatever initiative and whatever program that you're designing, and, accommodate and just truly accommodating them, right? So if you're going to have a work meeting, you're not going to have it at 1 p.m. because, the student has school that time, so things like that. You have to really be intentional about how you incorporate students and also which students you're incorporating, right? Because, I've had many people, come up to me like Eleni and talk to me about, things that are happening in the other side of the state. And, I'm always, able to provide support, but, I'm from, an urban area, and Kentucky's mainly rural, and so I'm not going to be able to provide the support that, that you need. And so I think it's truly about not holding these student councils on the department, or these student board members on a pedestal, because my voice is no different than, a student who, is in the school next to me, and so just prioritizing and truly seeing the value, because everyone can listen. Every ally, I have no doubt that you can listen, but it's what you're going to do with that information. It truly determines whether or not you value the voices of students. And so there's many ways to go about it.
Thank you.
I would also like to say that having that equity stance, so that from the jump street, this is what your focus is going to be. So be the ones who say, well, we need rural as well as some of the bigger city voices, and reach out to those that you don't hear, because we know who we hear all the time, but then form some relationships so that you can get those voices that are not typically heard, and work with the schools and the teachers or whatever you need to do. And there's community groups of youth that throughout different states that you can also tap into. We have Students for Educational Justice in New Haven that we can also tap into to hear the other voices around the state. So just really being determined that it's going to be an equitable opportunity.
Yes, one more quick comment going off of that. The word relationship was mentioned, and I think that's really important, because student voice has to be present from the beginning to the end of whatever particular process or conversation you're talking about. It's not just a box you can check. And I think sometimes, I don't think that's a particular mistake that I've noticed through my work at the state. However, I have observed that at the school level, that sometimes it's like, let's talk to students, let's have like a 30-minute conversation about whatever we're talking about changing in the school, and then go from there. But similar to how you would engage a teacher or an administrator in a conversation about whatever educational related topic we're discussing, students have to be involved from start to finish as well. Yeah.
Thank you for those important pieces of input to all of you. I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Representative Sutter. Go ahead.
Thank you, Giselle. And thank you all for being here. My name is Jessica Sutter. I'm the Ward 6 representative on the board, and currently serve as the president. First, I want to just thank you for the things that I've heard, specifically this commentary around co-creating with students, and around having the adults come to the students versus vice versa. And I really am impressed by this notion of the infrastructure that some of your states have built around how student representatives both arrive in their seats at the board, but also the relationships they have with other students throughout the city, and the structures that are in place for that. One thing I'm grateful for is our student representatives have been helping us build those structures, because that is not something DC has in law. So our student representatives that previously were 2 on the board became 4 because our student representatives brought forth a proposal in their annual report and said, we'd like to see this. And this was something we were able to build. To Giselle's comment earlier, we have students as voting members of committees, and students are able to voice vote, but their vote does not count for quorum, and their vote doesn't count for passage of resolutions. So if there were if say a member of the board were absent and there was a 4-4 tie on a resolution, student vote does not count as a tiebreaker for resolutions. It doesn't count for board leadership, et cetera. And that's a legislative change we have to make as a state in order to make that happen. And it's certainly something our students have nudged us along on, because it is something that matters for the voice of students to be authentic. So my question is this, as DC is building more infrastructure and more ways to sort of heed the advice you all have offered, are there things that if you were building a structure within your state right now that you would want to see, that you might recommend to us, that since we have a little bit of a blank slate and a chance to make things that do not exist, what should we be building as infrastructure for student voice? Keeping in mind, we're much smaller than either Kentucky or Massachusetts or even Connecticut, which is not a large state, but still bigger than we are. Are there structures you would encourage us to think about building within our state to make sure student voice is treated in this authentic and genuine way?
Thank you for the question. I think, first off, a student vote should not count any less in any sense than an adult vote should when we're talking about educational policy. So that's the first thing, is just ensuring that all the votes are equal. But also, I think it's important that if there's opportunity for multiple students to be sitting in places where in spheres where they have a vote or they have some sort of say, that there's a requirement for those students to come from different areas of the city as well, just to ensure that it's not coming from all the same place. And that sort of helps to ensure more of a diverse voice. Obviously, it's not enough to ensure a complete representative voice, but at least it's more of a representative sample.
Yes, I agree. I'm trying to make sure the structures I'm trying to say is easily translatable for DC, because I'm kind of confused about the state district dynamic, but it's fine. So yes, I echo that. And also something that we're doing here in Kentucky as well is making sure you have that also a diverse perspective, right? So every region is represented. And so we're trying to, make this council or make this, board of students who serve on their districts Board of Education, and that will be a propeller in the message for establishing more seats, because we don't have that many seats on the district level that have student representation, and this is currently with Kentucky with the non-voting voting matter. Lots of legislators don't like the fact that students can vote or, want to vote. And so we've kind of resorted to non-voting just to make sure, just as a foundation, right? So that we have as many students as possible across the state, but also make it non-controversial. And so hopefully in the future we can progress into the voting stage. But I'd say, whether that be, on their local, like students on their, school decision-making committee or, like region, committees in terms of DC, just having them, come together and maybe work in conjunction if you have a student advisory group. But that will ultimately spread the message of, education policy and student integration within education policy and things like that. So I think just the cultivation of students who want to work within education, students who are already doing so, students who have close ties with their schools or local departments of education, and just creating a strong foundation for, student integration, I'd say.
Thank you.
And this is just my perspective as an educator in terms of infrastructure. I think there should be some kind of systemic decision-making about how we are going to go about ensuring that you have those diverse perspectives of students in being authentic about it. so that students can be a part of the decision making. And one of the things that we have is legislation for student advisory. And I just recommend that if that's the way DC needs to go, that it's really precise and specific to students and not mixed up with some other initiative, because sometimes they'll piggyback on child welfare or foster families. And so really try to have a clear and distinct policy that's funded and then organized with all of those who need to sustain the work. So when these young ladies hear their term is up, everybody knows, and it's clear and transparent about what the process is for the next round of student engagement.
Thank you all so much for that. I also would be remiss if I didn't end on the fact that we're very lucky in DC to have the student representatives we have had. This is my 4th year on the board, and each year we have had truly spectacular student leaders who have brought these new ideas to us, and we've been able to take them and run with them. But Leave knows I say this a lot. There are days I think perhaps we should just turn over the running of the meeting to the students. They run the student advisory committee meetings so effectively and so thoughtfully. So I appreciate all of you being a reminder for me that this wonderful work of our students continues in states across the country. Thanks very much for the time, Giselle.
Thank you. I'm going to go ahead and turn it to Representative Wattenberg for her question.
Hello. Thanks, everybody. I missed the very beginning. I once again had technology problems, so I missed that. So if I repeat something or if I ask something that you've already talked about, just say so. Don't bore everybody else, and I'll go back and watch the recording. I also just want to acknowledge as well just what terrific input we've gotten from our students here. It's really been something. So my question is really about sort of the process and sequence, especially around standards and in your states, and how students are part of that in conjunction with other groups. So to take, and to focus on standards, students have a view, we're working on social studies, historians have a view, geographers have a view, teachers have a view, families have a view, child development experts have views. How do you, what is the process in your state in terms of who pulls together at what points, at what point do students come in? What's the right way to weigh the student voice versus some of these other issues, all of which are like really important inputs on this very important part of our schools? That's it.
I can go. Thanks for the question. So the process for raising the CD standards in Massachusetts started with the CD Advisory Council. CD stands for Competency Determination, that I referenced before. And on that council, there was from the get-go a student member, but also different community stakeholders as well. So they had teachers, department members. So that kind of touches upon your question about how to involve all of those different voices that might have diverse input on the issue. And then from there, they formulated recommendations and ideas, which they then brought to the board. So I think that was a really effective way to ensure that different voices were included from in the conversation from its beginning. So
Thank you. And just to ask on that, and so then that group formulates sort of principles. Is that also the group that votes on it? Are there board members involved? Sort of how does that part work?
So they had a few meetings during which they had discussions about the competency determination standards and different implications of raising the standards. They kind of went through all in depth what people's views were on the issue of raising standards. And then from there, they came to the board and they actually presented to the board, given all of the discussion that they had, what they recommended, what the thoughts were. And that's how we kicked off the conversation at the board level.
Thank you. Anybody else on that?
Yeah, in terms of, like student involvement within the standards process, I'd say we see more of that if it's directly tied to, legislation. If a legislator, proposes a bill that were to change standards, that's when we would see, students from across the state really rallying up, especially if it's, a topic that directly impacts, curriculum and ways of learning. But I'd say like internal departmental business, we do have committees within the Department of Education. Unfortunately, we don't have student representatives, but for each subject, we do have a committee. And I would really highly recommend that a broader range of stakeholders were represented within those committees. Maybe not all might have voting power, but I'd say, we do need that representation, even if it's from an advisory standpoint, right? And so that's something that, hopefully we'll able to incorporate in Kentucky. And then we've also had from the Student Advisory Council for the department, we've had a presentation. It was a while back in relation to standards, and this was when they were updating a certain group of standards, and they asked for our approval, not necessarily approval, but asked for our feedback. And so we were able to provide information in terms of, what we think about the standards and how this will be applicable to our respective districts across the state. And so I think having, those continuous meetings with students, with any other stakeholder, and just truly getting their feedback and making sure that, you incorporate that feedback into, your development process, I think is really important.
Thank you.
And I don't know how students are engaged in standards in Connecticut, but I will definitely tell my colleagues in the social studies department how wonderful it can be to have students involved in that, if they're not already. So thank you. It's exciting to hear what great things are going on.
Thank you, Representative Wattenberg, for that question. I'm going to turn it to Liv right now, just because we haven't heard a question from her just yet. And then I'll turn to you, Representative O'Leary.
Okay, awesome. Thank you. If I have bad connection, let me know, because like you mentioned, I'm sitting in my car outside of my school. So thank you so much for your time. Hi, my name is Liv Bernstead. I'm a student representative on DC State Board of Education. And I think Representative Chang's question touched on this earlier, but I was wondering if you kind of speak to, and I guess in regards to standards, but also like more broadly, if you want, if you've noticed any issues with follow through on student voice. So I know you've mentioned how student voice is heard, but just if you've noticed any issues with like follow up or follow through in terms of actions after feedback is given from students. And if so, kind of what has been done to address or ensure follow through. And if that was unclear, let me know.
I'm happy to start. I haven't particularly noticed any issues with follow through on student feedback because I think that through conversations with students and particularly department staff, there's been a sort of basis and foundation of relationship that's underscored that from the beginning. So when I've been called upon to meet with department staff to discuss, whatever issue they want to talk about. It's a very open conversation. they've always expressed interest in, how's the student advisory council going? How are you doing with school? What are your extracurriculars? So it kind of, it goes beyond just the conversation about the issue that we're talking about, and it goes into developing relationship. And then from there, I've found that those staff members have then reached out again to talk about, to continue discussing that same issue or to discuss a different issue. So I think that when those conversations are held and there's relationship that's built, you avoid the issue of follow through, because it just feels very natural to continue the conversation when it's appropriate.
Yeah, mine is pretty similar. I haven't experienced issues with follow through, but I think that's solely due to my position. If I weren't in this position, I'm pretty sure many people wouldn't follow through with me. And that, is a testament to, many students and their interactions with people who say they want to help, right? And so, I'm pretty sure there have been instances where people want that one thing from you, and they allude to doing more things, and they allude to you being a part of this process, but at the end of the day they never follow through with that, right? And that wasn't their intention in the first place, but they're spewing out that they do want to involve you and incorporate you just to get your attention and just to aid them in whatever they may need. And that is a huge problem in terms of what is student voice and how are you going to be an ally, and how are you going to value and how are you going to honor these students, and how but valuing them as a person and their personal motivations, but not only how they benefit you. And so I'm sure that this is a very widespread issue across the country, even about how we ask students to be a part of certain things. But I think we can't have that I'm gonna get the follow-up email but somebody else isn't. It shows that favoritism that we have amongst students, and it's something that's really upsetting, and we need to work towards doing better on.
I'm wondering if advisory groups have some way of initiating a survey to let your stakeholders know what your priorities are, and maybe ask questions. How are you engaging diverse youth? Or if you want to know about the feedback, how do you ensure that the cycle of exchanging information is ongoing? Or just some way that you can have this way to analyze how these relationships are going and how you're seen in the community.
I will say it's important to set a foundation. So prior to any interactions, you make known what your position will be as a student within that particular organization or that initiative. And, you hold, the people accountable for how you're brought into this work and how you're gonna, therefore influence that work. And so I think, when you have to have some persistency as well, as a student, in terms of making sure that your contribution is everlasting.
Thank you.
And Representative O'Leary, I'll go ahead and turn it over to you.
Oh, good. I'll just run with that. First thing I'd like to know is that if when you were talking about a survey, I know that Leave was just sort of sitting back in her car saying, "Oh yeah, we survey all the time on the Student Advisory Council." And the thing that about our student advisory council, and when I came on the board, I didn't know anything about the board when I came on it at all, because I had just been teaching all the time. But our student advisory council is awesome. And they're partners with us. And I, as a teacher, realized that the really smart people in the room are always the students. And that we are just, I'm just a vessel to try to introduce them to as many books and poems and things like that. But the real knowledge comes from the room rather than from the front of the room. And we don't treat our student advisory council any different than the other members. And just as, because now I'm sort of a veteran member on the board, but you know, their rookie year becomes a rookie couple of weeks, and then they're doing the same thing that everybody else is doing. I've got one thing that has happened. There aren't many good things that COVID has brought us, but all of our meetings in the last two and a half years almost have been virtual. And our meetings sometimes are, we have hundreds of people on a meeting. We get really, really interesting community input with a virtual meeting where somebody can be sitting in their shorts and doesn't have to get out of the house to be at a meeting or whatever. And the same thing happens with, because the students, since now we have 4 members of the student of the board, they are always on camera, always participating, always elucidating whatever important things are going on. And they're bringing that perspective that all of us old people, and I'm older than anybody on this screen, we all were students at one time. Y'all were probably really good students. I wasn't. I'm that other student, but we all were students. And the legislature, the governor, the mayor, whoever's in charge of the city or the state or the federal government needs to listen to student voices. And it's obvious to me that the 2 student members that we have from Kentucky and Massachusetts have an enormous future ahead. And I hope you stay in the education realm. I would like, are y'all graduating this year? Both of you are graduating. Can you tell us where you're going to be in August?
Yeah, I'm going to attend the University of Louisville so I could work closer with the Department of Education and you know, the council in post-secondary education and with the governor's office. So yeah, I'll be studying education and sociology.
Oh, that's fabulous. That's fabulous. That sounded like another plant that I asked the question. Eleni?
I'll be attending Harvard University and studying history and literature to hopefully become a English teacher.
Oh, good, an English teacher. That's the only job anybody should ever have.
Just have a whole country of English teachers.
Yeah, that'd be great. And Harvard is in Massachusetts too, isn't it?
Yeah, it's in Cambridge.
Yeah, I know. That's where I was born, Cambridge. Can't you tell from my accent?
Oh, you were Southern, just a little bit. I don't know.
South Boston, South Boston. And just to end it on this little sign behind me right here that says "Good Trouble." Y'all keep doing the good trouble, and don't let those adults in charge of your states think they know anything. That's it.
Thank you. Representative Chang, did you want to make any final comment or note before we end our meeting today?
Thank you so much. Just repeating what we started with and what's been said. Really, really appreciate this. I hope I mean, I know we're all in this together, and it's rare that we get this chance to share the questions that we've got and hear how you are thinking about it. So this has been super helpful, and I hope we can keep in touch. If you're okay with us reaching out again with the question here and there, how you would approach it, what you've been learning in your states, that would be super. And whenever you're in the nation's capital, we've got all of us, and I think we'll fight over who gets to take you out for a meal. So please do let us know when you're in DC.
Thank you so much. I'll be in DC in October.
Great. Please let us know.
All right. Thank you again. And oh, congratulations to both of you in your coming pursuits.
Thank you, everyone. Have a great rest of your day, and goodbye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you all so much.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you so much.